Good day to everyone. I am Nicholas Bornos of Capital Inc., and I would like to welcome you all to our second Jones Act forum. We are delighted to have with us a great panel. We are actually starting this conference today with one of the most interesting and dynamic and critical topics of the industry, the offshore wind. And as we were just talking before we came on live, this is an area that is a tremendous growth area with a lot of opportunities and, of course, a lot of complexities and challenges. So I would like to thank Charlie Papavizas, who is the partner and chair of Maritime practice at Winston and Strawn, who is going to moderate the panel, and he's one of the key sponsors of the forum today. And Charlie is going to introduce our panelists, who I thank very much for joining us today. Please note that you can submit your questions during the panel discussion, and Charlie and the panelists will reply to them at the end of their discussion. So Charlie, the floor is yours. Thank you to everybody for being with us today.
Thank you, Nicholas, and thank you again to Capital Link for putting on this event. I think it's useful for there to be an event that focuses on the Jones Act. It has its own issues, its own opportunities, its own paradigm, and it's a great thing to put on, I think, every year. And as you know, I've encouraged you to do something even bigger next year. We'll see how that works out. So we have really an all-star panel on offshore wind today. We have Jeff Andreini from Crowley. We have Gregor Madden from DNV and Josh Shapiro from Liberty Green. I think their bios are generally available, so I won't go into that. What I've asked each of them to do is to give us a few minutes about how they either see the market or their company's activities in the market, their choice. They can do both. So we'll start with Jeff, and then we'll go to Gregor, and then to Josh. And then we'll start with some more active discussion. So, Jeff?
Charlie, thank you very much, and appreciate the opportunity to speak here this morning on this panel. So as far as the market is concerned, Crowley is extremely bullish in respect to not just renewables, but also offshore wind. We've been playing in the space since roughly 2016. Starting out with trying to charter our tugs and barges to be able to do the feedering that's going to be required today for installation due to the lack of Jones Act wind turbine installation vessels. In 2020, we decided we would want to be more than just a tug and barge provider. And today our vision is to be a full service turnkey provider for the supply chain, both on construction, installation, operations, and maintenance. We operate under 5 different verticals, marine terminals. And on the marine terminal side, we see that as the nexus point for everything for offshore wind. And you control the terminal, you control the supply chain. The second one is marine transportation, which again is utilizing our equipment to be able to do the transportation of the foundations, of the components, secondary steel, offshore for installation. On the O&M side, which is our third vertical, the main emphasis there is our fully compliant Jones Act operation known as CREST, build, own, operate, service operation vessels for offshore wind. The fourth vertical is around supply chain. So it's really about how we connect companies, underserved communities together in order to build out what's going to be required. These could be services, these could be products to be able to support the offshore wind market. And then the last one is on construction and installation. So what we like to call our small scale EPCs, that could be around cable, it could be around aggregate, it could be around the transportation and the construction of offshore wind transformers. I know there's a lot of people out there who are still skeptical about the market. We are not, and the reason we're not is because we have won contracts, and in fact, we will get started with our first one here in May, where we will be transporting via tug and barge the offshore wind transformer for the South Fork project out of the Gulf of Mexico up to New York. We will follow that up with our first feedering job, 2 tugs and a barge, to do the transportation of the components for the South Fork project as well out of New London, Connecticut. And then next year, working together with Fred Olson, at that point will be the largest project in the United States, 98 turbines out of the New Jersey wind port. We'll be transporting those well over a 1.5 time period for the purposes of doing installation. I think most people know we own and operate a terminal up in Salem with Avangrid and CIP as our anchor tenants. We are in the process of finalizing a lease for 168 acres on the West Coast in Humboldt for supporting floating wind. We just finished up on an agreement with the Port of Strawn for the Gulf of Mexico for 42 acres. And we're in the process of trying to do the same thing in the state of New York and the state of North Carolina. I mentioned the SOV. We were fortunate enough to win the contract with Siemens to be able to provide a 15-year charter for our first SOV to support Dominion and the Coastal Virginia project. And we'll have some further announcements, hopefully in the second quarter this year, about 2 new entities that we'll be setting up in order to support the construction and installation process around nearshore cable lay, and then also offshore wind transformers, as I mentioned, construction, transportation, and installation. So all in all, I think a lot of people know what we're doing. As I said, we're extremely bullish on the market and see this as future, the next 130 years for the company.
That's excellent. I'm glad you're bullish. I can tell you from my personal activity, I am also bullish. I have plenty to do in the offshore wind space. So Gregor, I'm assuming DNV's got plenty to do as well. What are you guys doing?
Hey, thank you, Charlie, and also thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk on the panel. DNV's had a long history in the wind industry. We got kicked off on onshore wind, years ago, and then we moved into the fixed offshore wind and also the floating offshore wind. DNV is a leading company in the classification for offshore wind vessels. We hold a significant share in classification for WTIVs and SOVs and the larger vessels that will support the industry. We also provide services for all our stakeholders in the offshore wind industry. Some examples, of our fields of expertise that we're actively engaged in offshore wind is our advisory services, where we cover decarbonization and digitalization. We also provide CVA services for mandatory federal requirements. But we are also diversified into other things. We also do technical due diligence. We have a software division that's actively involved in offshore wind. We also do port infrastructure assessments. We've got a team that help people through the permit management systems and all the challenges that face. And also we've got risk consultancy that look at maritime challenges that we have with ports and channels and other obstacles. And really that's really just to name a few. So DNV is fully committed to be a partner in the wind industry.
That's excellent. Josh, go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. And thank you to Capital Link for putting this on and highlighting what I think all of us on this panel think is quite an interesting topic. Not only just offshore wind, but just the renewable energy sector and where our entire global environment is moving towards sustainability. I'm Josh Shapiro on behalf of Liberty Green Logistics. Liberty Green is a consortium approach to offshore wind. We say it's supply chain management for the offshore wind industry. This concept was born out of our other logistics vertical, Liberty Global Logistics, which is an international multimodal provider with a core focus on the ocean, but connecting to trucking, rail, and air freight worldwide. And so we took that approach and developed a vertical within the Liberty group of companies to support the supply chain in the United States, specifically focused on offshore wind. We currently have 24 members of our consortium, and they include individuals that are landowners, asset owners, service providers, everything from your turnkey logistics solutions to your software solutions, including Marine Coordination Center and software providers. Our view of the offshore wind market is that it's ripe with opportunity for a select group of companies that have the skill set and expertise in the supply chain management business, as well as the asset investing and Jones Act qualified capabilities to perform the services. And so, like Crowley, Liberty has a long history in the US flag and investing in US-based opportunities. And I think that within this select community, where we have lots of international partners that are looking to partner with all of us to bring some of the expertise from Europe and Asia into the United States supply chain. And I think that the opportunity in front of all of us is not only the impact on making returns on investments, but it's also making an impact on our climate and our environment as our nation moves towards renewable and sustainable energy.
Thank you. Crowley and Liberty Green, you're both building vessels in the United States. You guys are in the market every day for potentially building more vessels in the United States, particularly in the O&M side of the business, crew transfer vessels, as service operation vessels, SOVs and CTVs. So Josh, can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing in the market in terms of pricing, capacity, ability for US shipyards to do what's necessary to build out the fleet?
Sure. So I think that overall, we all know that there is limited Jones Act capacity in all of our shipyards compared to the rest of the world, and that there are constraints and barriers of investing in the Jones Act and the citizenship requirements to hold the asset that limit our ability to scale the amount of yards that we have available to build, and of course, the amount of vessels that those yards can produce each year. That being said, there is capacity. There are specific yards that have expertise to build vessels, and we have been building vessels in this country for quite a long time. In particular, on I think the yard focus area, that there are medium-sized and smaller yards who mainly depend on government business, and those yards often have to prioritize those long-standing customers, and that limits some of their capacity or capability to take on new assets. And some of the larger yards, while they're capable of building assets, have never built Jones Act WTIV or a Jones Act SOV. And so we're in our first iteration of those yards and those capacities coming online. And then lastly, just competition and financing. The yards have an increased cost of labor and an inflationary pressure today. And so prices are on the rise. And of course, the Liberties and Crowleys of the world have to account for that in our bids and have to pass that cost increase across to the customers, which effectively, at the end of the day, comes across to the consumer as an increased cost of producing energy.
Gregor, Jeff, either of you, I mean, you want to comment on shipyard capacity, and whoever wants to go first?
Yeah. My comment is that when we look at the major yards, it looks like they've got a portfolio of military vessels, and then they've got this quasi-military commercial market, and then they've got the commercial market. And offshore wind is going to be competing with these other sectors for an available slot. So it may come down to a commercial decision, from the shipyard, what they want to build.
Yeah, Jeff.
Yeah, Charlie, I guess I will add two things, just kind of dovetailing a little bit on what Josh was mentioning. I think right now, the biggest challenge that we see is the complexity around the vessels that are being asked to be built. And you think about, the SOV that Fincantieri is going to do for us, highly complicated vessel to build for the first time, and under, as you can imagine, time restrictions to get it developed and off to Dominion in a timely fashion. So that's the first challenge that I think we face as an industry. How do we get experience, and then how do we get better at doing it? The second piece is, and I stress this a lot to individuals and to companies, the West Coast is going to be a significant player in the offshore wind market. And the challenge that the West Coast faces right now is that there are no vessels out there that are going to be able to do the work that's going to be required. When you think about anchor handling vessels, when you think about tugboats, barges, semi-submersibles, SOVs, crew transfer vessels, none of that exists. And to complicate things further, when you look at the emissions rules the state of California has, and quite frankly, could most likely be adopted by Washington and Oregon as well, you have to be thinking along the lines of alternative fuels in order to meet up with that criteria. So while we do have I would say a dearth of assets, we need more to be able to do the work on the East Coast. There's no doubt about it. I don't want people to not understand also the complications that are going to happen on the West Coast if they want to build out in a timely fashion, and the amount of vessels that are going to be required and the way that's going to have to be accomplished.
I want to
limited amount of shipyards.
I want to return to the environmental aspects in a minute, but let me ask you, Jeff, a question. Are developers taking into account the fact that your shipyard pricing is coming in higher because of inflation and other factors, or what do you see from the other end of it? In other words, you have to produce a service at a price. Is that being taken into account?
I think to some extent it is. It is a very challenging market. There's no doubt about it. I'd love to hear Josh's comments with respect to CTVs. SOVs are difficult. There is no doubt about it, and a lot of that does have to do with inflationary issues, but as much to do with, as I mentioned previously, there's a certain amount of risk in building those types of boats for the first time. And I would like to think that developers are seeing that. I do feel that the price that we won at for the Siemens bid was fair. And let's see what happens as we move on. I'm hoping, as I mentioned previously, that as we become better in our shipyards at learning how to build these vessels, that those prices eventually will start to come down. But I think right now, I do think developers do understand that the price is going to come in a little bit higher in the beginning. But I believe the hope is somewhere down the road, we start going like this as we get our lessons learned. And as more shipyards have that experience to be able to build the types of vessels that are going to be required, not just tugs and barges, but some of these more sophisticated types of ships, such as WTIVs or SOVs or alternative fuel anchor handling vessels as well.
Josh?
So I would kind of approach this from kind of three themes: cost, risk, and return. There is a substantial cost to building, as Jeff was saying, these new assets in the first generation, where the yard is doing their first SOV or their first CTV in the instance of the Patriot CTV that's being built at Gladding Hearn for the Massachusetts Wind Project, Vineyard Wind. And they might have shipbuilding experience, but they're building these new vessels with new technologies and new requirements by each developer. So each developer having their own individualized requirements makes each vessel customized for that developer. That adds to the overall cost of the project. Risk. The risk of building in certain yards and the limited availability to either bond or give refund guarantees, unlike the international yards that can give a full refund guarantee supported by an export-import bank. And the other risk of the construction period and actually delivering on time, especially in the CTV market. A lot of the CTVs being constructed are delayed. I'm pleased to report that our CTV is not delayed. And the ability to deliver on time directly impacts day-to-day operations and also has a massive cost component to it. And so that's another area between both the risk of delay and the risk of refund guarantee that has to be considered. And then in the third area that I would focus on is return. And this gets more into the developer side, but given the complexity, structure of cost and risk in the Jones Act, there is a certain return profile that we expect in the United States investment market. And so the developer's ability to give long-term, stable, and secure employment allows pricing from a day rate perspective to come down and allows investors to receive either traditional commercial lending or private equity support. But when we see short-term contracting, with the cost to build these vessels and the risk associated with it, short-term contracting makes it extremely challenging for people to execute. And that comes back to they need a larger return for a short-term contract. And so when you add these three components of cost, risk, and return, these add to some of the complexities of making the investments. That being said, once these investments are made and once these assets are floating and operational, I think both Jeff and I would agree that we see a ripe opportunity moving basically from Maine straight through down the East Coast into the Gulf and eventually the West Coast as well for projects and redeployment opportunities. It's a question of, can you get over that initial cost, risk, and return perspective to get in the market?
Gregor, you can comment on developers, but why don't you? But you can also, I would expect you to comment a little bit about emissions, West Coast requirements, or maybe generally, where the vessel market is going to have to move in terms of emissions. Yeah,
I think particularly there's been a fair bit of discussions on environmental regulations just across the board. And the whole industry, if you're required to be compliant to a flag, then you have no choice but to meet those regulations. There's been a fair bit of discussion with California and particular concerns that I think that we do have, like, if we look at California, it's going to be floating wind is what the main market is. And the types of vessels that floating wind would bring in would be typically like anchor handlers. And then if we look at the market on the anchor handlers, a lot of these anchor handlers are pretty old. There has been new anchor handlers built over the past 3 years. Most have been international though. I'm not really aware of very much a Jones Act coming out. And to mix into it, the size of the chain they're talking about would mean that an existing anchor handler not only would need to modify their handling capability, it would probably also have to re-engine, to meet a potential EPA regulation, which is going to cost more cost, and it's going to be a longer time for payback to those management companies, which kind of doesn't make it so attractive as it was when first people started talking about floating wind.
Sure. So we talked a little bit about shipyards. What about the existing fleet and repurposing the existing fleet? What role can rebuilt vessels, repurposed vessels play in this mix? Jeff, you have some views on that?
I do. That's one of the things, Charlie, that we look at first when we start to think about building out our fleet. How do we potentially repurpose existing assets to do things a little bit more efficient before we decide that we're going to go out and build something brand new? And so that can be underutilized barges or again, barges or boats that are going off charter and maybe they don't have the amount of utilization that they had previously. How can you work that out in order to support some of the different projects that we are looking at right now? I will add that one of the things I'm really excited about is the fact that Candies has won the CSOV bid up here in the Northeast. I think that's outstanding, and I'm really rooting for their success, because if they can prove that they're going to be able to do that work, it really opens the door for a lot of others here in the United States to be able to prove, to developers over in Europe that we do have a fleet that is more than capable if retrofitted, to be able to provide the services that are going to be required to support the wind market.
Josh, do you have a view on repurposing?
Yeah, so I think there's an opportunity to use either existing assets or repurpose existing assets. One of our consortium members, which is North Star Marine, has actually been successful in acquiring and converting OSV vessels under contract, as well, and to one of Gregor's comments, as well as acquiring and is looking at deploying anchor handling vessels. Of course, there are some challenges with the California emissions, but that's again some of the power of our consortium and our turnkey services coming to using existing assets or modifying them, including trying to comply with future environmental regulations. Overall, though, I think that while it's great to look at repurposing assets, I think that that's only going to be viable at the beginning phases or the initial phases of offshore wind. And what we see on the Liberty side is that the tenders are not really designed around the use of repurposed assets. And so because of the limited availability of assets, developers are having to entertain that. But their true long-term desire, especially as we decarbonize, is to have custom built or specific built purpose assets that meet their standards. And I also think that there's a large influence in the market on the pricing of the oil and gas market and the interest that individuals have to convert their assets. And so, for example, as we've seen the price of oil significantly increase related to both the Russia-Ukraine war, but also the overall global demand, you're probably seeing less interest for an owner to take their asset out of service to look for a conversion contract for what is likely a short period of time versus taking active and gainful employment today. And so maybe if we see a repricing of crude oil and we see a drop in the utilization in the Gulf of Mexico, you might see more eagerness and willingness to do that. But this has a direct impact on the availability of assets that are capable of being taken out of service for deployment. And so I think that that's another factor here. It's not that they're not capable of being used. I think in Europe, they started with using oil and gas assets at the early days, but today it's almost all purpose-built assets, and we will likely follow the same trend in America.
Well, yes, purpose-built assets today. What about the future? Is it possible that we'll wind up with a CTV spot market in North America? Do you guys foresee a CTV spot market in the future? Anybody can take that one.
So I guess I'll start with this one. So I think just going to repurposing assets, it's extremely difficult in the CTV space, which is the crew transfer vessels, how the technicians get to the turbines for the audience, to use a crew boat or a supply boat. That they don't meet the speeds and capabilities that the developers need in order to get to the turbines. So repurposing some of those assets is a short-term solution, but the efficiency of a newly built or purpose-built CTV and the speed it can travel will require those vessels to be prioritized based on both emissions consumption and also servicing, the turbines each day. Regarding demand for the CTV market, we believe that there is likely going to be a spot market that will develop, but that market will not develop for some years to come because you need the investment capability to undertake, or the contracting to undertake the investments in whether it's a $10 million asset or a $100 million asset. Most thoughtful investors are not just going to play the speculation game here. They're looking for contracted employment. But just to that, I think there's already an existing or the creation of a secondary market. I wouldn't necessarily call it a spot market, and that is that while the primary focus is on serving developers and OEMs in their CTV needs, the secondary market is that the installation contractors need CTVs to get their people out to their vessels. And so there is an opportunity for short-term deployment in what I would call a secondary market. It's not necessarily a spot market yet.
Let's turn a little bit to a little more general topic, which is what's the biggest bottleneck in at least the marine side of the market, the marine side of the supply chain? Is it shipyards? Is it people? Is it terminals? What's the bottleneck? What do you say to that, Gregor? What's the biggest bottleneck that the US market, offshore wind market faces?
The biggest bottleneck that we're seeing at the moment is the delay in the supply chain. And we saw it became worse during COVID. It wasn't good before COVID and became worse during COVID. But from what we can see is that, those key components that are required to build the ship, whether that's steel or the main engines or the propulsion system, that's what we're seeing just now as the main bottleneck.
Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take this as for the overall industry, Charlie, and I know Josh has heard me say this before. I used to worry about, was it terminals, was it vessels, was it people, and my realization is, especially as I spend a lot of time out in California, workforce is key, and we don't have enough trained individuals to be able to do all of the different jobs that are going to be required to keep this industry not only stood up, but running for the future. I was chatting with somebody yesterday at a conference in New York, and I truly believe this. There needs to be an outreach now to young people like in 6th grade on up, because those are really the folks, those are the individuals who are going to drive this industry moving forward, to let them know there is a great opportunity to be able to work in a good paying industry that's going to be sustainable for many, many years to come. But if we don't establish the right training centers, if we don't establish the proper curriculum, if we don't set up the proper certification programs, if we don't go out into underserved communities and to be able to recruit, we're going to have a problem, because you can have all the terminals ready to go, and you can have all the boats and barges and other vessels ready to go. But if you don't have the ability to man them, if you don't have the ability to have people on your yards who are going to be able to run those operations for construction and maintenance, I'm really not sure how you're going to get this industry up and running in a timely fashion.
So I would agree with Jeff. I'll focus on 2 areas. So just on the workforce area, he's completely correct. On the Liberty Green side, in our consortium, we've partnered with Atlas Professionals, which is a workforce development group that's internationally recognized and has experience in offshore wind in Europe. And we've been working with them to try and develop an offshore wind workforce development program. We've also partnered with SUNY Maritime, one of the state maritime academies in New York, in sponsoring the development of a digital training course to get exposure and outreach for people that maybe can't go back to school but can take an online course related to offshore wind, and that's soon to be released in the upcoming months. And I think overall, Jeff is completely correct. We can have assets, but if we don't have people to move the assets, no goods and cargo get delivered and no turbines get installed. So that is definitely one of 2 areas I would say is a bottleneck. The second area I would focus on is more related to asset investments. And that is basically firm contracting periods. So I believe that as the developers and BOEM makes more awards, we will also be able to see a further interest in contracting assets that have long-term employment associated with them. And so the more awards and more turbines that each developer gets awarded, the more they can extend contract cover. And I think one of the largest bottlenecks that we're seeing now is the challenge of making the investment for a 1 or 2 year firm contract period with the hope that you'll have gainful redeployment thereafter. And that uncertainty is limiting the amount of SOVs you see invested in, is driven certain companies away from making Jones Act WTIV investments, and is also limiting some of even the speculation in the CTV market. And so term and contract period at gainful rates is one of the other areas I focus on bottlenecks. Just to kind of wrap this back to the workforce development, we do need people. We need people that not only are committed to the industry for a voyage, we need people that are committed to the industry from the K through 12 outreach, as well as people that have existing licenses that are willing to leave their current sector and move into the offshore wind or renewable sector. And Liberty is also working in the unionized segment with the ILA and the SIU in promoting that workforce development as well.
So we have several questions from the audience, and I want to take at least one of them, so I'll read it. How soon before developers, OEMs, and Tier 1 suppliers request Jones Act waivers to meet their needs? How can U.S. maritime industry fend this off with solutions without long-term commitments needed to support domestic builds? Anybody want to take that?
Charlie, aren't you the perfect person to answer that question?
Well, first of all, I would say a Jones Act waiver is impossible because the way the law has been constrained and constrained again and constrained yet again, you can only get a 10-day waiver, or it has to be in connection with a military operation. So a meaningful Jones Act waiver today means a change in the law. So I think that's a remote possibility. That is the basic answer, and doesn't require a lot of work. Anybody want to add to that?
Yeah, I think Charlie, I think, like, when we start talking about the WTIVs, before anybody built a WTIV, everybody was talking about, maybe we're going to get a waiver, and like nothing moved on a waiver, and somebody went ahead and started building a WTIV. But the industry then started looking at what other alternatives were there, and then that's when the feeder barge option came into play. And then people said, hey, we can make this work. Well, let's go with the feeder barge, and then maybe we can just use international WTIVs. And I think the industry will develop around this, because I got some feedback from the Gulf Coast yards, and when they were talking about starting out doing the OSVs for Jones Act, they had to start working towards making it work. Where that was looking at a more simpler design, trying to reduce costs, trying to reduce time, but being able to deliver the vessel. And I do think that maybe with the Jones Act, it will start pushing people towards looking to how you can make things better or make it work.
Jeff, did you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the most challenging thing right now, Charlie, is, what will be the success of the feedering process? If Crowley and Foss are able to do this in a timely fashion, and most importantly, well, no injury to crew members or people working on board barges, I think we're going to be fine. We have a lot to learn over the coming next 4 to 6 months. But I think we've got a good plan in place. I know that we as Crowley have worked very long and hard at devising a technical solution with both Van Ord for this year and with Fred Olson for next year. I'm well aware that Foss has done the same with Deme. So let's see how it plays all out. I am more concerned, Charlie, that ramifications may occur if there isn't an effective solution as in feedering than I am with trying to get everything taken care of if feedering is a solution. Because I do believe there's enough assets on the foreign market to be able to do that. And some of the other solutions that are out there, like the Blue Tech solution that's been proposed, and also the Maersk solution as well.
Yeah, by the way, I'm in complete and total agreement with you that we need to see how the feeder solution actually works in practice, because there's a lot of issues that aren't necessarily fully baked. Right. So we have only a couple minutes. I'll give you each a minute and answer the following question, which is, and Jeff, you've kind of already done this, so you just need to reprise. Are you bullish or pessimistic about the maritime market, the offshore wind maritime market? Gregor?
You definitely put me on the spot there, Charlie. I think we're optimistic about the industry. Yeah, we feel it's going to be an exciting industry and full of opportunities. Yeah, so I would say that DNB was optimistic.
Jeff?
Charlie, I'll say it again. We're all in. I've been 45 years with Crowley, and I've done a lot of different jobs. I have never been more excited about a position that I take within the organization in helping grow out what I think is going to be one of the strongest energy producing organizations and industries that we have ever seen. And I'm truly excited to be at the starting gate, to be able to do that with folks like with Gregor and yourself and Josh as well. It's very, very exciting time.
Josh, you got the last word.
I'm the last to go, so I'll keep it short and brief. Obviously, we're optimistic. That's why we are all here. And that's why we've all taken the time to hire the people and begin to make the investments that are necessary to build out this business. And for anyone who's interested that's in the audience, we're all available for follow-up. And I'm sure Capital Link can get you in touch with us, whether that's capital providers, asset owners, or collaborators.
Are you speaking for me, Josh, as well? I'm available.
We're all available.
It's all good, man.
Well, Nicholas, I see you're there to wrap us up, and that's good because I think we're done. And thank you very much to the panelists. I really enjoyed the discussion, and I thought it was very informative. Thank you again.
All right, thanks, Charlie. Thank you.
Charlie.
Many thanks from me as well. Great discussion, and I have to say we had tremendous attendance. In closing, I'd like not only to thank everybody, but also to remind you that this will be available for replay upon demand within a couple of hours. And also you can address any questions at webinars@capitallink.com, webinars@capitallink.com, and then we will fill them out to the panelists so they can get back to you. And again, thank you to everybody.
Thanks again.
All right, thank you.